Okay, so before we start, yesterday was a slightly more technically oriented talk. Today I'm not going to talk too much about gear, things that you bring with travel, and some of the logistical bits. This is, it's going to cover a different territory for some of the travel problems that you encounter. Really the purpose of this is, I made a boatload of mistakes. I hope that my mistakes will be useful to you so you don't have to make them. That is really the point of this. There's no right way to do travel work. I found a pretty broad range of travel experiences through other colleagues and the stories that we've swapped. This is just an approach. And I think really one of the things to start with is if you ask yourself, why do you travel to take pictures? I mean, when we think about it, it's actually a really weird thing. People have not traveled for fun for the better part of civilization. You didn't leave. Leaving was really dangerous. The only reason that large quantities of people ever moved around the planet, really prior to about 300 years ago, was for these reasons. If there was a war, like you were pushed out, you kind of had to go. That wasn't like, I'm going to plan a trip to Nepal and I can't wait to see it. People being married off, this was your other ticket to move. If you happen to be born in a place you didn't particularly like, you might be lucky or unlucky enough to be married off somewhere else. Exploration, trade, and military, these things kind of went like hand in hand, but this definitely wasn't leisure travel. The closest thing that I could find historically to travel the way that we do it now is a pilgrimage. And I say that not for religious implications, but it's just because the idea was that in some way you were going to better yourself through an experience, and it was usually baked into that experience that it wasn't going to be smooth. Unlike a pilgrimage, you kind of knew that there were going to be some level of difficulty. It wasn't going to be going to Disneyland, but the plus side was on the back end of that, you would somehow be better in some way. So that's kind of the parallel where I find like historically where travel lands for us. I asked everyone who travels with me why they travel, and people give me all different types of reasons. I've kind of distilled the range of reasons that people give down to this. And I feel like if you don't have an understanding philosophically of why you're doing something, the odds that you produce anything interesting are slim to none. You want to have a sense of what you're doing, who you are, and why you're doing it, which should become part of the pictures. And this is like initially, like I started traveling because I was born in the UNESCO World Heritage Site known as New Jersey, which was, it was dead boring. Everything kind of looked the same. And I just saw stuff on TV and magazines and thought, there's gotta be something more out there. So let me try, let me see what it's like. So when I first started traveling, I was working for a construction company, and what I would do is I only got 2 weeks holiday. I'd take the other 6 like unpaid. I just needed to like get out in the world and just go see things because I didn't even know what I wanted to see. So the curiosity thing was sort of first. That just got my foot like out the door. Then getting to distinct experiences, things which like going through a process and saying like, man, I've never seen that before. That's never happened to me, and it's completely altered the way that I view the world afterwards. Those types of experiences keep me moving. And then I think long term, it should be fulfilling. There should be something in your travel process that like when you lay down at night and you go to sleep, you should be like I did that. I fulfilled that part of it. Because if it's not, if you're constantly trying to like, oh, I gotta get this, and like you're trying to like pick apart a travel experience, you're just gonna go home kind of tired. But what fulfills each of you is different, which is why I can't teach that. There's nothing that I can say up here that's gonna help you get to that other than saying like, let's just have a conversation about it because your reasons for doing it are probably gonna be different from mine. So how do you plan a return trip? Yesterday we talked about how do you go to a place that you've never seen before. I'm going to be talking about places that I have been to and how I approach the second round after I have some lay of the land, I have a few contacts, and what approaches I use to get into places that I couldn't get into the first time or I didn't even know existed. So step one is I think I probably make all of the guides and fixers who I work with around the world a little nutty because I troll Google Images and Instagram and find pictures of stuff and send them little tiny captions with very little information to say, like, can you find me that? I saw this picture. It's like geotagged somewhere near where you are. Where is this and how do we get in there? Because when you go to a return trip, you don't want to be going just on your own. You'd like to have some sort of local resource who's going to be able to help you forward. And if they have a sense for your taste, it makes that process a lot smoother. You could think about it like getting, TripAdvisor recommendations for restaurants. If you're going to a place and looking for just sushi restaurants and your contact is an expert in steak, you have a problem. You want to align like what you're interested in, what you want to find with what they can provide for you. So I will do this like I had shot of a lantern maker in Japan, and I wanted to shoot another one. So the easy thing is like, just take the pictures that you've made of something and send them and say like, I want this. I want your local version of this. So these guys, they're 4 hours apart geographically. But the guys who helped set this shoot up, it gave them a frame of reference so that they're like, okay, got it. Like I know approximately how big the workshop is, how many people are doing it, what type of work they're doing. And it just lets them help you out in a way that's a lot easier. I find that particularly working with governments, anybody who works in an office, I don't know what happens here. I worked in an office for a year and then I never went back. I couldn't stand it. Something comes to a crushing halt inside of offices. Things just take a really long time. So in dealing with people who are helping me out with logistics, I've got to allow for a lot of time. So I don't know if any of you guys remember, Henri Cartier-Bresson recommended a book, Zen and the Art of Archery. It's a popular book. He thought that there was something in the philosophical approach that was, you could find it in the Kyudo practice, which is Japanese archery. And he recommended this book to a lot of the people, like he recommended in interviews to students, to people inside Magnum, like read this book, it's gonna help your photography, it makes sense. So I read the book. The weird thing is there's no pictures at all. And it's a very visual practice. And when I looked on the internet for pictures of Kyudo, I also didn't find much. There was like one short documentary and like a bunch of ceremonial pictures. But when I was looking for the things that I found inside of the book, I couldn't find any visuals. Like I couldn't find it. So in doing a little bit of research, trying to get access to shoot these guys, this was like a 6-month letter writing campaign. Because they operate under a Budo Center. There's like a whole hierarchy of people who have to approve the process. So allowing time to elapse is something that I had to do because particularly working in Japan, if you need to do something like urgently, they just like quietly go this direction. They don't attend to urgency. It's not New York. They don't care. So it's just a slower process, and it was worth it. But it wasn't something that could be hurried. So as you're planning for things, people will say, like, how long do you plan out? I plan out about a year in advance because stuff takes that long. Things going through offices can take a really long time. But in the end, I find that like the reception is really, it's totally different than the sort of friction that you get at the beginning of a process. One example here, mentioning Instagram. So I had found a picture of that opening, like an iPhone shot on Instagram. And I had been traveling to Matera in southern Italy for a number of years, I think probably about 6 years in. And I know the city pretty well, but I couldn't visualize. I'm like, where is that passageway? Where is it? Like I kind of know like all the streets and historic centers, any of the like arched coverways. I couldn't find it. And it turned out that I asked one of the guy who manages the hotel that I stay at, I asked him, and he was like, oh, that? Hold on a second. And he goes in the back, and he comes back with keys, and he goes, that's our property. It's locked. Do you want to go there? I was like, yeah, where is it? And he's like, it's right there. It's like, it's literally up the hill. You just can't get at it. The whole thing's blocked off. So he chucked me the keys, and he's like, when you're done, just bring them back. So it's like there's trying to find these things in advance. This area had been locked out since roughly the 1950s. To the best of my understanding, no one has been in there to take anything other than an iPhone shot since then, and it's going to get developed. So it was just like a time capsule that got cracked open, and he was just like, keys to the kingdom, take them, whatever you want. So developing relationships with people who you can go back to, I mean, to him, he's just like, yeah, it's there. I don't think about it. But to me, like, I had been looking for like 2 months online trying to figure out like where this spot could be and couldn't make any headway. So it allowed me, one, to get access to it, to shoot something that, I mean, I look for it on Google. See if you can find it, because it's like, I don't think that there's really not that much out of it. And then it also allowed to go back and do things more than once, because one of the things that this very peaceful looking room, in order to get into this room, you have to pass over a section that's open 4 meters down. So the ceiling, the floor of this and the ceiling that's shared, is totally chewed out by erosion. So he's gave me the warning. He's like, look, man, there's no insurance. Like, you fall through the floor, like, that is entirely on you. So I was not so ambitious photographing the first year, because I didn't want to fall through the floor. I mean, the rest of the shots for the trip were probably going to go to hell if I didn't, emerge from the whole of the architecture. So there's a little cautionary measure that I take in going into places, because there are bits that they really fall through the cracks. Like, I don't know that there's insurance for this. Like, you could probably get emergency helivac insurance that you could get to do this, but like, I don't travel with it. So, set your own boundaries that you're comfortable with. I do not want you jumping off of buildings and into rivers and say, like, I saw this guy at a B&H thing, he said you could just do anything. Don't do that. No one has coverage for this. The other thing, like, be prepared to write. A lot of people will ask for what you want to do. So Ogutani Gumi, who's these guys who I wrote to, they're one of the premier temple builders in the Kansai area. So to just think about in terms of construction that you see around New York, their typical disassembly process takes 3 to 5 years just to take a temple apart. So when they're talking about the places that they're constructing, they're over 300 years in construction. It's just this mind-boggling operation. But they are a private enterprise. They don't host photographers. They don't have like people come and poke around their shop and see things like they have from trees that are uncut to pieces that are going into finished temples, like the whole thing. I spent 10 years in high-end residential construction here in the city. I've never seen anything like this building process. But to get into it, I had to tell them what I was doing, why I was doing it, where the pictures were going to go, what could be offered to them. They wanted to see my CV. They wanted letters of reference. So they're like, just understand that on the front end, like, you might have to do some paperwork, because people want to get a sense if they're going to give you the keys, they want to know that like you have the good sense about you on how to operate inside of a space. And they want to know what you're going to do with the images. So like, people will say like, oh, it's so cool to do travel photography. Travel photography is a lot of paperwork. I spend most of the time doing paperwork and then very small concentrated spurts actually doing the shooting. So if you're not into like this part, the other part you never really get to. One thing that I mentioned yesterday that I do and I encourage you to do is that people need pictures. Everyone. I'm yet to travel to a place in the world where people don't actually need pictures. Now, they might not tell you that on the front end, but they tend to need them, so that if you can offer them something that they need, it's amazing what they're willing to help you with. So as you go to a place, a lot of people will pick a travel location and pick something based strictly on what they want to do. Understand that this is a collaborative process between you and the other people in that space. And the more mutual it is, I find the more opportunities get presented to you. So these guys, they produce ceramics in Uji, which is just south of Kyoto. They've been doing it for 16 generations. And they use the pictures that I've made there for their work, for their website and things like that. And then afterwards, and this was completely unexpected, a collection of craftsmen in Kyoto did a book, and they invited me to the book. Sort of the easiest book publishing arrangement. You don't really have to do anything. They just ask you and you put it in. So it's even easier than doing the book yourself. And I was really honored because they have loads of journalists who come in, and their regular complaint about journalists is like they all ask the same questions. They ask like, how do you build something that's perfect? How long does it take? And they get tired of this rinse and repeat, and they're a lot happier to work with someone in a more collaborative setup than something that's like one-directional news. These are two sets. So the first time I photographed, Sasuke is a knife maker, swordsmith, and he makes scissors for gardeners in Japan. The first body of work I did with him was all black and white. And when I finished, he got prints. This is like, prints are like the golden ticket to your next project. If you take a picture of somebody that they like and you give them a print, you take the time to make like a paper print, you don't have to make like an 8-foot print. It doesn't need to be heroic, but like the frequency at which this actually occurs is so slim, and the impact it has is so huge. So after bringing prints back, what it allows is the chance to go back and really see what's changed. So I went from shooting dedicated black and white work for that original project to being able to come and experiment with color work, because there was a part of the workshop that like didn't really make it into the first project. And the other part that I wanted to explore a bit more, this is Yasuhiro, he's the master of the shop. This is Eric, his apprentice. So when I first started a few years ago, Eric was like, he was sweeping the shop. He wasn't doing anything significant. Over the years, everything changed for him. It went from like, had a girlfriend, got engaged, got married, eventually left the shop, started his own knife making operation. Like there was a real growth and process that happened as he went from a young man to a guy who's now like fully settled in Japan. His wife, Mariko, is there. Like they got married last summer. Like it's just amazing to see that trajectory. And it's something that like, you couldn't do it in one trip. There's no way to take a time dimension that's spread out and compress it and say like, I'm gonna get everything, I'm gonna go to Sakai once and I'm gonna do this. There really is a necessary time dimension that has to be drawn out. So I encourage you, like, try not to think about places as like, I wanna go there just one time. I try to pick a few places that kind of resonate with me, things that seem like they're going to have a little more depth, and build up those experiences over time. So my advice on fixers and guides. How many of you use fixers? So a fixer is someone who handles logistics for you overseas. So like a tour guide, you sign up for a tour and like they have kind of a set thing. A fixer could also be a guide, but they help you with things like arranging your shoots and getting access to locations. So a lot of guides, if you have tour programs, they're easier to find online, and you can usually ask them if you have things that are specific outside of the itineraries that they run. Ask them like if they will do other things, because there may be something you want to do, and they'll say like, oh yeah, we can do that, but you have to kind of push past the initial entry barrier of just being able to have like a guide. So I found one of the fixers who I've used for a number of years. If I dial it all the way back, it started with a glass of wine. I went to a wine tasting here in New York, nothing to do with photo. The guy who was hosting the wine tasting travels to Italy for the Italian wine. We started chatting about pictures. We talked about regions we had been to and hadn't been to, and I said I wanted to go to Umbria, and he said, if you go, you have to look up my friend Barbara. She'll help you out. So 2 years later, I mean, you just think of the time frame. 2 years later, Barbara and I finally get in touch, and then we start planning the first trip. And she gets a sense of what I'm interested in, and I was really focused on the craftsman there. So the stained glass craftsman on the top, and then the weaver on the bottom. She has direct personal relationships with them. Now, you might be able to write to them and kind of get some sort of access, but I say that because it was a weird social experience that kind of had nothing to do with photo projects. I wasn't thinking I'm looking for a fixer, but from that one glass of wine, finding someone who had like local access to that community has something that's opened up that environment in its entirety in a way that on my own, I couldn't do it. So I say that just to like, I feel like when I saw people who were doing travel work before I really got into it, I couldn't get the gap between like, how do you leave your home here and get into this place over there? And they never wanted to talk about it. So I say this because what I've understood is I can't do everything on my own. I really need the collaboration of people locally to facilitate these types of shoots. And some of them are, you'll notice I do a lot of craftsman work, city work. This is sort of an outlier photograph for me. And what I had found is as I was studying some of the architecture, one of the things that I wanted to look at regionally was that when you think about architecture, like architecture comes historically out of the ground. Caves are our first sort of form of architecture. And I had never really been inside of any cave system before. So I looked at this, I found some really terrible photos online, sent them to Barbara, and I'm like, Barbara, what's the deal with this place? And she's like, it's not very good. You don't really want to go there. She's like, we went there when we were like 10 on like a school field trip, like probably like a pass. And I was like, let's just try anyway. So photography prohibited. You can't do it. Letter writing campaign begins. A few months later, we get permission to photograph. So we get special access, we're allowed to photograph. Cost us a few extra euros, not like a big deal, but it was just being able to say like, this is what I do, this is what I'm trying to do, I want to come and see you here and do this, will you allow me? Because what I've found is that a lot of the photography that I've seen around caves, it all looks like Nat Geo stuff. It looks like a really punchy color exploration work, and I felt like there was probably something else that I wanted to see, and it was. Like, to me, the experience was unbelievable, and it's even hard to get the scale from it. Like, inside of the caves here, you could fit the, anyone know the Duomo in Milan? You could fit the Duomo inside the cave. I mean, it was huge. You just like step into the belly of the earth and look up at like an incomprehensible level of scale. And that was like, again, if you go online, if you look up Frasassi Caves in Le Marche, there are like 14 horrendous pictures of it. Like it's on there, and I find a lot of the things that I end up photographing, like they're kind of out there, but no one's really taken the time to explore them and give them the photographic credibility I think that they deserve. So how do you get in touch with cultural councils and tourism boards? You know, one thing to understand when you travel, most countries have cultural councils and tourism boards. I mean, across the world, you know, first world, third world, the lot of them. When people come in to take pictures, they would like to have some sort of interaction. And I'm kind of surprised at how many people, like, they just don't reach out because these two parties don't know that the other one exists. People traveling to the country have no idea the cultural councils are there, and the cultural councils just have this like flood of tourists that come in and they don't really know what to do with it. But you can write to them and tell them what you're interested in doing and see if they have resources for them, because a lot of them actually have dedicated budgets for what they consider to be journalistic coverage, but they really stretch that. I mean, it's really like if you're going to produce pictures that end up in some format that is of some value to them, they will put, no hyperbole, tens of thousands of dollars of resources behind you in order to make your pictures happen. And that's something where, you know, one of the guys after the talk yesterday came up and he's like, you know, you must need like a trust fund to do like this type of work. I'm like, no, definitely not, but you can't do it on your own. And to be able to access the local resources, step one is you have to reach out to them. So if you're in, how many people live in and around New York? All right. Can, like, you guys know, like, Manhattan's filled with embassies. Embassies all have events. They usually have free events where they showcase some stuff they do. Here's the food, we make this fabric, we were featured on this thing. They have like some sort of party to celebrate something that they do. And when you go there, you can say like, I'm going to your place to do this. And that, like, I'd love to tell you that there's a different configuration, that it's a really sophisticated way of making contacts. It's not. You just kind of turn up, tell them what you're doing, and they turn around and say like, yeah, actually, we'd like to help you do that. And then as you move through spaces, what I find is that you'll have, say, a branch here at an embassy, and then you'll have one like in country somewhere else. And what I've found, particularly in working with the Japanese, is they will, like, they've helped out on things that they wanted me to do, but as we've continued our relationship, they help out with stuff like it doesn't even apply to their agenda. They're still just receptive to helping just because we kind of cracked open the door. So I really encourage you, if you guys are going to a place to really like try and connect, like just get yourself out of the pathway of just like traveling through a spot and not having any personal relationship with the people that you meet there. A little bit on planning for some things that I've had go wrong. When you schedule itineraries, like give yourself a little wiggle room. Don't schedule yourself like a day to go to a place. You know, I see people who like schedule itineraries and it's 5 different cities in 10 days, and it's like there's no way you're going to get it right. The photo gods will just punish you. It'll rain every day. Like it just won't work out. So really give yourself some space. One thing that I will typically do is if I have a very important shoot, I will schedule it at the beginning and the end of the week. I will do the shoot on like a Monday and Tuesday, but I will set aside a Friday and Saturday to go back. Because if something happens, usually it doesn't happen for the balance of the week. If you get caught in like a weather rut, like you can usually get out of it a few days later, but I tend to put like the more important shoots. If I've got like a 3-week out of country thing, first few days I'm not doing anything, no camera, no shooting. And then once I'll do the shoot, like it's like the most important one I'll do up front, and I'll repeat it again at the end. This way, if anything goes wrong, they're set up to allow me to come back to do it. Because if I never call on it, it's great. I got 2 extra free days, I can do whatever I want. But if this goes south on the front end of it, it becomes a real problem to deal with. And like weather can be an issue. Plan for sick days. So this was a photograph I made at a workshop in Florence for a guy, Raffaele Romanelli. He's a sculptor. And so this is my savior, his assistant. Because what happened was, going over to have the shoot, I'm like, all right, Raffaele, like, I'll be there 2 days. No answer. I was like, well, I'm getting on the plane when I land. I'm here, landed in Florence, ready to go. Still nothing. And then I finally pinged Marta to say, like, what happened? What's going on? And she's like, oh, he's in the hospital. He had a Vespa crash, broke his arm, and he's in the hospital. So he's like, he's not checking email. If you only have one point of contact, you have a problem. Because people, like, they get sick, people die, they got to go to funerals, someone's getting married, they forgot to tell you. So, like, when you set up a contact, try and get, like, whoever the main contact is, but try and have, like, an assistant. Because it's a really silly thing, but if you don't have that second contact, you could be kind of out of luck because you, all of a sudden, like, they're not there. For the places I've found that have fees, how many people typically pay something when they take pictures while traveling? So like, I'll say 5 to 10% of people. I find that actually paying for things is a really good way to just show that you're interested. I've never seen really expensive shooting fees anywhere. I mean, usually you're talking less than $100. Sometimes it's as little as like a few dollars. It's almost just like a gesture to ward off people who just want to come and like snap a few pictures. But for the places that have had dedicated fees, especially like in workshops, I get, because you go to a workshop, they don't really work so much while you're there. They're kind of losing a little bit of time. So I get them charging a fee because their output is diminished because they've got you poking around the camera the entire time. Like, I get it, it's okay. The thing that I found though is when you go back and you see them again, the fees go away. And they really continue to allow you to work. So for the gondola maker in Venice, I made a collector set of pictures that I made for him. I gave him, he gets his own like artist-proof set completely because I thought it was a very unique experience to find something I had never seen in Venice. I mean, everyone goes to Venice and sees 1,000 gondolas. I mean, that's the obvious thing. But it's like, where do those things come from? Like, who did those? Like, somebody makes that thing. Something goes from like a pile of oak into a boat, and that whole process happens behind closed doors, and usually you can't get access to it. So on the back end of it, I thought it was such an interesting experience that like I wanted to thank Roberto and Michele. And again, I found this same process. This is Roberto on the far side. This is Michele, his assistant. Over the years, like this has continued where he's actually not working right now because he's sick. He's recovering from chemo, which was really difficult to see this spring. And Michele's gone on to open his own shop. So like this whole time dimension really moves on. And if you have the patience and the luxury to travel, it's something that you can really like open up and explore in a way where No one's going to beat you on time. If you're dedicated to photographing a place where you have pictures that are like 5 years apart, there is no way to compete with that. There's no way that someone coming into a place, I don't care who they photograph for or how famous they are, you can't compete with that. That is something that is distinct to your experience. And that's why I encourage you guys to do that and explore that at length. Now, some of them have opportunities that are a little more involved. You know, I was surprised when, after photographing in Japan for a while, the Japanese government, in collaboration with Leica Japan, offered to put on an exhibition. And I thought it was really cool, not because, yes, an exhibition's cool, that's one thing, but it's nice to be able to have the people who were in the pictures there at the show so that they could see it. You know, it wasn't an experience that I had ever had or gone through, and it was incredibly humbling just to see how psyched they were about the process of the pictures, like going from like, usually their recollection of the shoot is like, yeah, this guy like rolling around the floor of my shop for a few hours, for a few days. It was kind of a pain in the neck. They never really think it's gonna like end up somewhere, but it can. And when it does, you know, it's an opportunity to see like, you know, Yasuhiro outside of his outfit. I hardly recognize him if he's not completely covered in dirt. And this is Eric and his now wife, Mariko. So it was sort of cool to be able to see that process evolve over time. And you know, I would encourage you guys to be able to take the time to return and open up those possibilities for other people. So the sort of last two examples I'm going to give on like how do you deal with rules. This town, Krakow, Italy, it's a closed town. It's totally fenced off. You can't get in. There's no access. And when I asked about access, their requirements was we had to wear hairnets and we had to wear hard hats. And we did. And that's what we looked like. And it was fairly ridiculous, but it was something that they required of us. They said that there was a set tour. You have to go with a historian. There's nothing that you can do outside the tour. So you're going to walk through this abandoned city, and you can't go into any of the buildings. You can't touch anything. You can't. Got it. You just do this. Okay, cool. When do we go? And then when you actually go, and we met the historian who took us around, William, the guy had like a key ring, like a janitor. And we said, like, look, the history's cool, but we're really more interested in architecture. And he was like, oh, I have all the keys to all the buildings. If you'd like to go in, we can go in. So he swings open the keys. This was like one of the principals in the city. This was his house. So this 25-foot ceiling room on the left-hand side, which is not a heroic picture, but just for scale, that's the kitchen. So to get into these spaces, as we went through, we're walking through these rooms that really no one has been in for any extended period of time since the city was emptied, more or less in the 1970s. Its current inhabitants are one donkey and two cats, but there are no people left living in the city. The city is falling off the side of a mountain, so it's a very slow-moving landslide, and pieces are literally peeling off. So like this sort of stuff, the room on the other side is missing that piece. So he goes, don't go to the edge. There's a good chance that that section may actually fall off. So for those who are heavy in the insurance industry, like this is not for you. But if you find the guy with the keys to the buildings, like go in. And it's not on the tour. They won't tell you it's an option. You have to just actually go there and do it. So we finished up with this building, and then we're walking through. This is actually the entrance to the city that we came in through, and we got into the church. And he opens the church, and when he flings open the door, the first thing you see is that. And he said, I'm sorry, but the roof fell in on the church. I'm thinking like, I think we'll make do. We'll be okay. So we're going through this ruin, which to me, like, it looks like some of the old ruins that you would find in pictures from the 1940s from World War II after churches had been totally bombed out. I didn't even know this existed. And the whole, whatever narrative you want to extract about, nature taking over the altar of the church, like it's all there. And there was no way to find out about it and about this access if I didn't actually go there. So, there was a woman who asked a question yesterday about visiting a village in Japan where it's like strict access. It's like, yes, it's going to look like that from the outside. A lot of things will start with no, and that's just your point of departure to move forward. The last idea I just want to leave you with is that remember that the people who you work with overseas, they don't always keep the same job. So I worked with a woman. She was my first point of contact in Kyoto. She worked for the city. She did press escorts. So if you come in with a camera, she's responsible for you. You do the whole business card exchange thing, you do that bit. That's Rie. She handles that. But a few years later, she changed jobs. She became the director of the Kyoto Craft Museum. So having been familiar with my work, she sent me an email. She's like, Adam, I switched jobs. Like, here's my new email address. Cool, what are you up to? I'm doing this museum thing. What do you guys do? And she's like, well, I have a network of between 3,000 and 4,000 craftsmen in Kyoto. Are you interested in photographing any of them? And it's like, you couldn't really bank that that was going to be her next promotion. But it's now I know, like, I'm never going to run out of stuff to shoot in Kyoto. And she's fine to, like, now, like, I don't even have to make the prep stuff. She just yanks pictures from previous things. And she's like, OK, these guys will be into it. And it led me to this shoot. So after doing the archery, these are the guys who make the bows. So these are the oldest continuous lineage craftsmen that I've come across. They're 21 generations continuous of imperial appointment making bows for Kyudo. And there was really no way to get to this without going in that direction. So, keep up on contacts. Sometimes it's a little annoying to, keep the emails going. I actually find that keeping up with things like Instagram is way easier because you see what people are doing. And it's just a little ping to say, like, yep, I get you. I see what you're up to. But it really opens up opportunities that in my wildest dreams, I couldn't have guessed that, like, these ring of keys and these people switching jobs, that stuff actually happens. I think the full circle that I've found in travel is that there's a cycle of karma out there. It's something that you see particularly in Zen culture. Christianity's got its cross. Islam's got its moon. The Star of David in Judaism. For Buddhism, it's really this circle. It's this, and it shows up everywhere. And it's kind of like a weird reminder as you're going through and photographing a place to be aware of, like, yeah, that stuff is there. But that's all of my sort of mistakes and things that I've learned. And the one thing that I would ask is that as you try and go forward and make projects, try to just make something that's unique to yourself. You are all unique individuals with distinct experiences. And the whole idea that, like, everything's been photographed and there's nothing else to cover, this is complete nonsense. I found that there are a world of places that, like, people have barely even been into. And really, I'd like to see people come back with projects that when I look at it, like, I'm surprised. So really make the effort to find something like you haven't seen before and other people haven't seen before, because it really it goes a long way. Thank you very much. I think we're going to wrap up and let the next speaker jump on.